inclusive leadership. And I think it is a very close cousin to servant leadership. When I think about the tenets of an inclusive leader or the behaviors of an inclusive leader, I think about humility, being transparent and clear about what you don't know, what you don't do well, your mistakes, your shortcomings, and being curious of others' ideas and insights that might have a different perspective than yours. I think about empowering others to be their best and do their best, to service and support them so that their light can shine the brightest. I think about other facets of transparency, of authenticity, and I think about holding people accountable for what they can control. That when you see, and I also think about standing on principle and not standing on popularity. And I think when you embody those characteristics of principle, not popularity, humility, holding others accountable, and being humble and transparent and forthcoming and inquisitive, then you're an inclusive leader.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow?
Today we look at something you've probably never heard before because it was new to me, but inclusive leadership. This really is about you creating a place where you have not just the right people at the table, but you have the right diversity and you are including different voices and different thought, because that really does, really allow you to have a more powerful company. One of the data points that is mentioned by our guest in here, which I'll get to in a second, is a diverse team may take a little bit longer to make a decision, but at the end, it'll be a better decision. And I do believe there's real power in that. So we talk about inclusive leadership today. Our special guest is Dr. Randal Pinkett. He is with BCT Partners. They were on the Inc. list this past year. And our conversation on inclusive leadership goes into what are the traits of an inclusive leader? What are the things that are really dominant? One of those that we single out was transparency and how that plays a role. We also look at values and how important it is to hire based on values and how we don't want to let race get in the middle of that. It's actually values are much deeper. So I think there's a really interesting conversation today about inclusive leadership. My job is to help you be the most powerful leader you can be. And I do believe being inclusive is a powerful stance inside of leadership. So that's part of it for sure. But I want to make sure that you are leading your team with power and grace, confidence. And I want to help you do that. If you feel like there's anything getting in the way of you growing your company and leading your team, then we should have a conversation about what it is getting in the way and really be honest with each other about how you can address it. I'll help you come up with a plan, maybe even identify the blind spots that you don't even aware of. And that is really powerful if you think about it, because no one else is having these conversations with you. If you're listening to this and you want to be a better leader, just go to genehammett.com and schedule your call today. Inside that conversation, we will get to the heart of what is getting in the way and what you can do and how you must show up consistently to be the leader that you want to be. Just go to genehammett.com and schedule your call. And here's the interview with Dr. Randal. Dr. Randal, how are you?
I'm good, Gene. How are you?
Fantastic. We're going to have a great conversation here about leadership. Before we dive in, tell us about your company, BCT Partners.
Absolutely. So BCT Partners, established in 2000. So we are celebrating 22 years as a company, co-founded by myself and three of my college classmates, Jeffrey, Lawrence, and Dallas. We met on the campus of Rutgers, started our first business when we were students at the ages of 20 and 21. And I will turn 51 this year. So that's 30 years later. We've done about 4 ventures together, BCT being by far the longest standing, most successful. But after 30 years, Gene, we're still together and we still get along after 30 years. And BCT's mission is to provide insights about diverse people that lead to equity. And so equity is our end game in the workforce, workplace, marketplace, and community. We acknowledge the growing diversity in our society and we give our clients deep insights to understand that growing diversity, to better support and better service that growing diversity, using some very sophisticated tools around research, data analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, traditional quantitative research and qualitative research, all to build their capacity to achieve equity for whomever they are seeing as their stakeholders in the workforce, workplace, marketplace, and community.
Well, I want to give you a chance too to highlight the book that you wrote with your co-authors. It's right behind you if you're watching on video, but it's Black Faces in White Places and High Places. Okay, I see both
Right.
books. There's two books back there.
Yep.
The new one is Black Faces in High Places, right?
That's right. That's right. That's the sequel.
Tell us about that book and why that is necessary today.
No, I appreciate that, Gene. The first book I wrote with Dr. Jeffrey Robinson, one of my business partners, who I mentioned a moment ago. We're also co-authors together. Our first book was 2010, Black Faces in White Places, which chronicled our experience and that of other African Americans who have found ourselves in environments where we don't see many reflections of ourselves, where African Americans are underrepresented. And how do you navigate those environments and not lose a sense of who you are? Fast forward from 2010, when we wrote that book, to 2020, with the murder of George Floyd, with the COVID-19 pandemic, with the political environment changing dramatically, we were spending time together and looked at each other and said, you know what, it's time to revisit the same themes in a new day, a new era, and a new context. So we wrote Black Faces in High Places, beginning in 2020 and released in 2022, to talk about the importance of Black leadership, of having Black faces in high places so that we have representation at the tables of power and influence and decision-making, because part of what we argue is right now we're not listening to each other. We need more understanding, but also the right people aren't at the table to begin with. And so we need more representation to help reconstitute the broken fabric that has kept our society intact.
Well, thank you for the work that you're doing. And I appreciate you bringing some fresh voices here to this podcast. We're going to dive into the leadership principles that have made your company work and grow. You guys made the Inc. list this past year. What do you think the core principle behind leadership that works for your company is?
For us, it really is about inclusive leadership. And I think it is a very close cousin to servant leadership. And when I think about the tenets of an inclusive leader, or the behaviors of an inclusive leader, I think about humility, being transparent and clear about what you don't know, what you don't do well, your mistakes, your shortcomings, and being curious of others' ideas and insights that might have a different perspective than yours. I think about empowering others to be their best and do their best, to service and support them so that their light can shine the brightest. I think about other facets of transparency, of authenticity. And I think about holding people accountable for what they can control. And that when you see, and I also think about standing on principle and not standing on popularity. And I think when you embody those characteristics of principle, not popularity, humility, holding others accountable, and being humble and transparent and forthcoming and inquisitive, then you're an inclusive leader. And that's a characteristic I see not just in me, but more importantly, in my three business partners. Like, part of why I think we've been able to stay together for 30 years is because we have this common set of values around what it means to be a leader.
You started this off with inclusive leadership is a cousin to servant leadership. How is it different? And I'm not trying to challenge you what now. I just want to make sure that we zero in on the real difference here.
No, I'm glad you asked that question, because it is an important distinction. I would say that what distinguishes inclusive leadership from servant leadership is being very intentional of who's at the table. And it gets back to our opening conversation. I can be a servant leader by taking for granted those who I'm leading. Meaning, let's say I get promoted to a leadership position, I start a company and I'm hiring people. I am a servant leader to those who I'm leading. But the inclusive leader, thank you for the question, Gene, says I have to be very intentional about seeking difference. People who are different than me, ideas that are different than mine. People have different cultural backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds, different ways of thinking, knowing, acting, and doing, because for better or worse, our natural proclivity is often to be around people who are like us. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you are not less likely to be around people who are not like you. And so the inclusive leader is intentional about seeking difference and seeing difference in their inner circle, in their midst, in their organization, because they know that in that inclusivity, there is power.
Well said, because I think a lot of people get confused on leadership. They just show up to do work. And I feel like that's just not good enough in this day and age. We have to be powerful leaders, and understanding what you've been talking about being inclusive is certainly a big part of that. Dr. Randal, I want to kind of dive into some of this stuff. You said transparency quite a bit. And I know that plays an important role in inclusiveness, but let's dive into it. How are you embracing transparency in your own company?
It boils down to how I show up every day, and how I am forthcoming about my own challenges, my own struggles. The old school leadership model is to demonstrate strength. I know the answer. I have the solution. I'm in command and control. Paradoxically, the inclusive leader is on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Not to say that you show incompetence, let's be clear, but rather to say transparency is saying there's certain things I don't know. There are certain things I don't do well. There are certain things I'm struggling with. And interestingly, as we've seen the blurring of the lines between personal matters and professional matters in the post-realization of the pandemic era. I can't say post-pandemic because we're still in it, but in the post-realization of the pandemic era, where the lines are blurred between personal and professional. Again, the old school leader didn't really care about your home life. Are you getting the job done? And please get me the job that I'm asking you to do. The inclusive leader, the 21st century leader, the transparent leader, to your question, is saying, hey, I know you've got challenges at home and so do I. And the more I am forthcoming about my challenges, the more I liberate you to be clear about yours, the more we can figure it out together. And guess what? I'm more likely to retain you over somebody else who's old school and says, I don't really care what's going on at home. And people are voting with their feet in this great resignation. If you want to find talent and retain talent, you got to open the door to having these authentic conversations that ask the question, how do you show up to be clear about what is your lived reality, to liberate others to share their lived reality.
Now, Dr. Randal just talked about the old command and control. The problem is a lot of people believe this type of leadership still is what works today. They command and control. They try to inspire by fear. And I want to get you to really think about that differently. In today's age where people are feeling burned out, people have lots of choices. You can't just do this based on fear. You want to make sure you're inspiring them from the inside. You're connecting with them from a real genuine place. I've had many of my clients come back to me with just some of the new ways of approaching difficult situations and difficult people that weren't meeting expectations with a lot more empathy and grace. And it really is a powerful way to lead. And it is better than the old way of command and control. Just my insights to you to help you be the more powerful leader and really inspire your people to take ownership of their work. Back to Dr. Randal. I know you've done some speaking before because I can hear the power in your voice when you share these messages. I don't know if it's from the pulpit, I would imagine.
I've done a bit of that too, Gene. I have.
So you can't hide it. But I can see you get fired up about it. And I want to go even deeper with this because I think this is just such a beautiful way to talk about it. And it really is one of the words that I use a lot is just being intentional. How are you showing up? And if you're not including people into the conversation, if you're not including them in the table, I believe you're going to have a weaker company and you're going to have a struggle to connect with those that you're there to serve. When you're in the world aligning resources together, I know you've probably got a pretty powerful team around you, but do you have any struggles that you deal with as you try to be this leader for your team?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And for me, among my greatest struggles is constantly challenging myself to understand and appreciate how we all see the world very differently. And that what might be my interpretation of your affect or your gestures or your tonality. And again, I appreciate that you took notice of my communication style, which is different than maybe your communication style or that of others. But I'm constantly challenging myself and in some ways struggling as well. As I see greater diversity within my organization, I know that diversity ultimately leads to greater challenges if it is not harnessed properly. Meaning people seeing things differently can lead to conflict because they see things differently. So I'm constantly challenging myself to understand what are the different ways in which people see things. And that leads me to being very curious to ask them, well, how do you see it? And when I'm not understanding how they see it, I actually go in deeper to say, could you tell me more? Because I'm still not understanding how you're seeing it. And that is a healthy way of bringing me out of my comfort zone, which is how I think and see the world, and constantly struggling and challenging myself to go into my growth zone And it's a journey, not a destination. Like I'll never arrive someplace, but rather I get comfortable in the discomfort of trying to see the world through other people's eyes on a daily basis, because it makes me a better person and it makes me a better leader.
Dr. Randal's been talking about inclusion and diversity. And I wanted to mention one of the projects that my former clients and some of my friends are involved with is called the A Pledge. You can go to theapledge.com. Really what this is they're marketing and agencies, digital agencies that have decided to really take an intentional approach to building out their teams to match the community, the face coloring of the community being direct. And so race becomes a really big issue. They're really trying to balance their teams around what it looks like in our community. And the A Pledge, I'm from Atlanta, so that's where that's coming from. But take a look at it. If you want to get involved with something or maybe start something like that in your own world, I think it'd be a really great way for you to be involved and be more inclusive. Just an idea. I'm just really proud of being involved with people and leaders that were able to come up with the A Pledge. And it really is something I think is making a difference in our community here in Atlanta, and it could make a difference for your community wherever you are. So check out theapledge.com. And back to Dr. Randal. All this makes me think of the book I wrote, not from a sense of it's anywhere near what you wrote in your Black faces in high places, but I wrote a book called The Trap of Success. And the big core behind that is we can get complacent. And I think what's happened in our world today is a lot of leaders and people in general have gotten really complacent with being comfortable by not having enough variety around them. I go to a gym and I get very intimate with my training partners. I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Do you know what that is?
I do not.
So it's sort of like grappling. Wrestling, if you will, for adults. It's what you see in the MMA. And I was at a training session this morning. One of my favorite partners is a Black guy, and he's just so incredible. And I'm so intimate with him. And I'm just thinking that most people are not comfortable enough to be that close to people of different color. And I think it's really sad.
I concur, Gene, and I appreciate you highlighting these issues in your work. One of my favorite TED Talks is by a Turkish storyteller, Elif Shafak. Her TED Talk is The Politics of Fiction. And while she's attacking this from a storytelling perspective, part of her core message is that we are increasingly finding ourselves in communities of the like-minded. We're increasingly finding ourselves around people who think like us, look like us, share our political ideology, and we live in an echo chamber, and we often don't even know it. And that only amplifies the need, piggybacking off your word, which I adore. It only amplifies the need about being intentional, because the status quo, our norm, our organic travels don't naturally take us into places of difference. They're increasingly driving us into places of similarity. So we have to be aware that we're in the echo chamber. You got to know you're in the echo chamber. And then you've got to be intentional about seeking ideas and people that just do not reflect your own identity.
I want to try not to project my bias here. And I'm going to just get direct with you, because there's something I think I've been curious about this for a while, and I get a chance to discuss it with you openly. And hopefully we can do that in a good way. I wonder how you are using values in your company. When I say values, I mean like company core values. Is that something you guys use in a good bit for hiring and developing people?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So I want to make sure that we're kind of aligned around this. I really believe that values are important. Having similar values in an organization is great. That doesn't mean they all have to come from the same color skin. That doesn't mean you have to think alike. It doesn't mean you have to, solve problems exactly like each other. But if you're out of alignment values-wise, it's a real hard to have the culture in your organization. How do you wrestle with that as you're building your company and growing it?
Yeah, I had an aha moment a couple of years ago when we were revamping our company values. I had traditionally interpreted company values appropriately as governing ideas for how people should behave. But the aha moment for me, and you hinted to this a moment ago, is it's not just that. It also should be the lens through which you're evaluating who should be brought into your organization. I mean, I guess like the filter for hiring is typically things like competencies, job description, behavioral based interviewing, et cetera. And then when we hire them, we tell them what the values are. Okay, so here's the values that or maybe in the interview we espouse them, but they're not on the list of things that we're evaluating as a part of the interview or the conversation or the dinner or et cetera. And so that aha moment for me was when we were revamping our company values. Here's how the process started. This is the aha moment. The process began by asking, think of people in the organization that best exemplify the company, and then describe the characteristics of those people. And then once you describe the characteristics of those people, extract the company values. It's almost like the inverse. It's saying, what are people demonstrating that uplift the values that reflect the organization, as opposed to the organization defining values that then to be reflected into the people. And so that inverse of the approach and how we bubbled up from the bottom up the values from how we see it manifesting in people's behaviors now is a guiding light for how we think about all things, not just from a behavioral standpoint, but also in terms of an evaluation of talent.
Well, I'm glad I asked the question because it's something that I have honestly struggled with, because I work on values within companies and part of my executive coaching. And I've got a book that I'm writing on, company core values, the leverage points, because we just have been talking about hiring. There are actually at least 12 different leverage points that you can use values as you're growing together. But I've been wrestling with how do you answer the race issue inside of values? Because some people will come back to us and say, but we want to have a diversity, but it's not diversity. It's diversity in skin color and diversity in approach and thinking, but it's not. Values are much deeper than skin color to me. Mm-hmm. One example is one of my client I interviewed had one value that they thought was really important. It was get the work done, but do it right. Mm-hmm. And the example he shared with me very bluntly, he said, it's not enough just to get the work done. Like, we want to make sure that we're doing it with the right connection and collaboration across the organization. We want to make sure we're honest and having high integrity around this. If they just get the work done and they don't do it right, they don't make it inside of our culture. And it has nothing to do with skin color. It's all deeper than that. Does all this make sense to you?
It does make sense. And I think along the lines of what you're articulating is one of the things that we can also value is difference. And that's got multiple dimensions to it. It can be difference in who's present, different in who's included, also difference in how people see things. And when we talk about innovation, we're talking about harnessing differences. The best, diverse teams take longer to make decisions, but they make better decisions. Innovation is predicated on having great ideas generated, and those ideas, when different and synthesized, can lead to breakthrough ideas. So I think I agree that values go deeper than race or skin color, but I think in going deeper, we can value difference unto itself, which then lifts up the importance of having the right people at the table.
Well, I am glad we had a chance to sit down and talk about this, Dr. Randal, and really introducing me to the concept of inclusive leadership really has been a pleasure.
My pleasure, Gene. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure getting to know more about you and your work.
Wow, what a powerful interview. I love his energy and I love the clarity with which he shared his message. I really appreciate you listening into this. And if you have any thoughts or questions about how this applies to you in your world, I would love to talk to you about your business. Just go to genehammett.com and schedule your call today. When you think of growth and you think of leadership, think of Growth Think Tank. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.